There was a time when I believed that love had a language of its own, one that didn't need words to be understood. A glance, a touch, the quiet comfort of sitting next to someone and knowing you belonged there. I thought Lenora and I spoke that language fluently. But I was wrong. Because sometimes, silence doesn't mean understanding. Sometimes, it's a warning. And the night I discovered the truth, I finally understood what her silence had been telling me all along. It started like any other evening. I was coming home late from work, exhausted but content, looking forward to the small rituals that made our life feel steady. A hot shower, a quiet dinner, and maybe a movie with her curled up next to me. I never considered myself a complicated man. I didn't need much, just honesty, just love. But as soon as I stepped through the door, something felt off. The house was dark, except for the dim glow coming from our bedroom upstairs. Lenora was home early, which was unusual. I hesitated, listening. There were no footsteps, no sound of movement, just a strange stillness that made the hairs on my arms rise. I walked up slowly, an inexplicable weight settling in my chest. The moment I reached the bedroom doorway, my world splintered. Lenora sat on the edge of the bed, her phone in her hands, her body illuminated by the soft, flickering glow of the screen. She hadn't heard me. Her expression was different. Not the warm, familiar face of my wife, but someone distant. Someone I didn't know. And then, she laughed. A quiet, intimate laugh that didn't belong to me anymore. I could have cleared my throat, could have let her know I was there, but something in me held back. My gaze dropped to the phone in her hands. A message was open, several, actually. Messages filled with words that had never been meant for me. Words that belonged to someone else. Last night was amazing. I can still feel you on me. I wish I was waking up next to you instead of him. Say the word, and I'll leave him for good. I should have felt rage. Betrayal. I should have stormed in and demanded answers. But all I felt was nothing. Like my body had simply shut down. Like my heart had chosen to stop reacting rather than shatter. I turned around and walked away. No argument. No accusations. No begging or pleading. Just silence. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't slam the door. I simply left. Because in that moment, I realized something. I didn't need to hear her excuses. I didn't need her explanations. The truth had already spoken for itself. And I was done listening. I don't remember much about that night after I walked out. It wasn't dramatic. No slamming doors, no heated argument echoing in my ears. Just the dull sound of my own footsteps as I left behind everything I thought was real. I didn't even take my car. I just walked. The cool night air wrapped around me, numbing the storm inside my chest. I kept walking, past familiar streets, past the bakery where Lenora and I used to get Sunday morning pastries, past the small bookstore where I bought her that poetry collection she never read. I passed the coffee shop where we had our first real date, where she laughed too loud and spilled cinnamon latte on her sleeve. It was strange how memories could still exist in the same places, even when they felt like they belonged to a different lifetime. At some point, my legs started to ache, and I realized I had no destination. I was just a man moving forward with nowhere to go. I ended up at a motel on the outskirts of town, the kind with buzzing neon signs and cigarette smoke clinging to the walls. The man at the desk barely looked at me as I handed him my credit card. Maybe he saw men like me all the time, men with empty eyes, with ghosts trailing behind them. Inside the room, I collapsed onto the stiff mattress, staring at the ceiling. That's when the numbness started to wear off. My mind kept replaying the messages on her phone, the laughter in her voice, the way she sat on the edge of our bed, texting another man like I didn't even exist. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was the ease of it. The casual way she gave herself to someone else while I was out there, working, believing in us. I wondered how long it had been going on. Months? A year? Had she ever felt guilty? Or had she simply justified it in her mind? Maybe she told herself I was too distant, too busy. Maybe she convinced herself that I didn't love her the way he did. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that she made a choice, over and over again, and I had been blind to it. I checked my phone. No missed calls. No frantic texts asking where I was. Maybe she hadn't even noticed I was gone yet. Or maybe she didn't care. At some point, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a restless sleep. I dreamed of her face, of her hands reaching for someone else. I woke up gasping, my heart hammering, the taste of betrayal thick in my throat. The next morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going back. Not for my things, not for an explanation. If she wanted to be with him so badly, she could have it all, our home, our life, our past. I wasn't going to fight for something that had already been lost. I turned off my phone. And just like that, I disappeared. The first few days after I left were a blur. I wasn't thinking ahead, wasn't making plans. I was just existing. I moved between cheap motels, paying in cash, keeping my phone off, cutting myself off from everything that tied me to the life I had before. It was easier that way, if I didn't have to explain, if I didn't have to hear her voice. Because what could she even say? I didn't mean to. It was a mistake? No. You don't accidentally betray someone. You make a choice. Over and over again. I rented a small cabin a few hours away in a town no one would think to look for me. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom place with creaky wooden floors and a fridge that hummed louder than my thoughts. But it was quiet, and that's all I wanted. Silence. A break from the world. A break from her. At night, the silence turned on me. I'd lay in bed, staring at the wooden beams of the ceiling, my mind replaying everything I had ignored for months. The late nights. The sudden interest in keeping her phone locked. The way she had stopped reaching for me, little by little, until I felt like I was just a shadow in our own home. I told myself I had been too busy, too distracted with work. But the truth? The truth was that I had been too trusting. I used to think that trust was a virtue. Now, I wondered if it was just a weakness waiting to be exploited. One night, I went into town, sat at the counter of a small diner, and ordered a black coffee. I didn't need the caffeine. I just needed to be somewhere other than that cabin with my thoughts. The waitress, Clara, her name tag read, poured my coffee and gave me a once-over. "Rough day?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Rough year," I muttered, staring at the rising steam from my cup. She nodded, like she understood, like she had seen men like me before. Maybe she had. Maybe this little town was filled with people running from something. "Well, whatever it is," she said, sliding a piece of pie in front of me. "Pie helps." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was absurd, the idea that something as simple as pie could fix the gaping wound inside me. But I ate it anyway. And for the first time in days, I felt something. Not happiness. Not even relief. Just a momentary pause from the storm inside my head. I started going to that diner every night, sitting in the same spot, drinking the same black coffee. Clara never asked questions. She just poured, served, and sometimes sat across from me when the place was empty. We talked, but never about the things that mattered. She told me about the town, about the old man who sat at the corner booth every morning reading the same newspaper, about the local mechanic who could fix anything but was terrible at relationships. I listened, because it was easier than listening to myself. Days turned into weeks. I started fixing things in the cabin, as if putting something back together would somehow put me back together, too. I kept my phone off, but sometimes I'd stare at it, wondering if she had tried to reach me, if she even noticed I was gone. Then one night, curiosity got the best of me. I turned it on, and there it was, dozens of missed calls, unread messages. But not from her. From friends. Family. My boss. People who had noticed I had vanished. But Lenora? Only one message from her. "We need to talk." That was it. No apology. No regret. Just those 4 words, as if she could somehow pull me back with the bare minimum. I turned the phone off again. I wasn't ready to hear her voice. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The message sat in my mind like a splinter, small but impossible to ignore. "We need to talk." 4 words. That was all she had to say after everything. No explanation. No desperation. No real attempt to reach me. It was as if she was fishing, casting a lazy line into the water, waiting to see if I'd bite. But I didn't. I couldn't. I tossed the phone into the drawer of the nightstand in my tiny cabin and left it there, untouched. I wanted to pretend it didn't exist, just like I wanted to pretend that she didn't exist. But it wasn't that simple. The problem with trying to escape your past is that it follows you, like a shadow that stretches no matter how fast you run. For a while, I found distractions. I helped out at a mechanic's shop in town, fixing cars for cash under the table. It wasn't about the money, I just needed something to do, something to focus on besides my own thoughts. The owner, Dale, was an old-timer with grease-stained hands and a habit of whistling off-key while he worked. He never asked why a guy like me, clearly not a local, suddenly showed up needing work. He just nodded, handed me a wrench, and let me be. I appreciated that. Nights were the hardest. The quiet pressed in too much, and I found myself back at the diner more often than not. Clara would greet me with the same knowing glance, slide me a cup of coffee before I even ordered, and never once pried into my business. I liked that about her. She understood that some people just needed space. But no matter how much I tried to bury myself in routine, my mind always found its way back to her. To them. The other man. The one she had been texting from our bed. Did she love him? Had she ever loved me? Or was I just something convenient until something better came along? I hated that I still cared. I hated that my stomach twisted when I thought about it. But the worst part? The worst part was knowing that no matter how much I tried to erase her from my life, she would always be a part of my story. And then, just when I thought I had settled into this quiet, invisible existence, something changed. It was a Saturday afternoon when I stepped out of the garage, wiping the grease from my hands, and saw a car parked across the street. It wasn't from around here. The sleek black paint, the expensive tires, it stood out in a town where most people drove rusted pickup trucks. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe someone passing through. Maybe a tourist lost on the way to the next town. But then I saw her. Lenora. Standing by the car, her arms wrapped around herself, looking like she didn't belong in this dusty little town. She hadn't seen me yet. She was scanning the street, like she was trying to decide where to start. My chest tightened. A year. A year had passed since I walked out of that house without a word. And now, here she was, in the last place I ever expected to see her. I could have turned around, slipped into the shop, let her wander until she got tired and left. But something in me, whether it was anger, curiosity, or something I wasn't ready to name, kept me frozen in place. And then, as if she could sense me, her head turned. Her eyes met mine. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then, with slow, hesitant steps, she started walking toward me. I clenched my fists at my sides, bracing myself. Because whatever she had come to say, I already knew it wouldn't be enough. She stood just a few feet away, but it felt like miles. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Lenora looked different, tired, maybe, or just unfamiliar. A year apart will do that. It strips away the familiarity, leaving behind only the raw truth of what's left. And what was left between us? A ruined past and a silence too thick to cut through. Her lips parted like she was about to say something, but nothing came out. She shifted her weight, glancing at the ground before forcing herself to meet my gaze again. "You're hard to find," she finally said. I didn't answer. I just stood there, arms crossed, waiting. She had come all this way. Let her talk. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. I don't even know where to start. I almost laughed at that almost. Start? The beginning was long gone. We weren't standing at the edge of something new. We were standing in the wreckage of what she destroyed. The time for beginnings had passed. I figured I'd find you sooner, she admitted, eyes scanning my face as if she was looking for something, some sign that I wasn't as cold as I felt. But you disappeared, Merrick. She said it like she had been the one left behind, like she had been the one blindsided by betrayal. And maybe she had been, in a way. She never expected me to walk away like I did. Maybe she thought I'd scream, cry, beg for answers. Maybe she expected to control how her story ended. But she lost that privilege the moment she chose to betray me. I let the silence stretch between us before finally answering. What do you want, Lenora? She flinched. It was the first time I had said her name since I left. Funny how something so simple could carry so much weight. She hesitated, looking down at the pavement. She swallowed hard. I know I don't deserve anything from you. But I had to see you. I had to try. The diner door creaked open behind me, and I felt Clara's presence before I saw her. She had been watching, no doubt, always keeping an eye on me in her quiet way. She didn't say anything, but I could feel her question hanging in the air. Do you need an out? I didn't take it. Not yet. You had a whole year to try, I said, my voice even. You waited until now. Why? She took a deep breath, wrapping her arms around herself like she was trying to hold something together. Because I thought you hated me. I thought you were done with me. I raised an eyebrow. And what changed? Her face twisted slightly, as if she was fighting something inside herself. Because I'm not done with you. I should have felt something at those words. Anger. Sadness. Maybe even pity. But there was nothing. Just a hollow space where feelings used to be. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. You were done with me the moment you picked someone else. She flinched again, like she wasn't expecting me to throw it in her face so bluntly. Like she had convinced herself that time would soften the edges of what she did. I took a step back, needing the space. Go home, Lenora. Her breath hitched. Merrick, please. I shook my head. No. You don't get to show up after a year and expect to rewrite history. You made your choice. Live with it. Her eyes glistened with something I couldn't place. Regret, maybe. Or just the realization that she wasn't going to get what she came for? I don't want to live with it, she whispered. But that wasn't my problem anymore. I turned away, pushing open the diner door, and let it close behind me. She didn't follow. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. I didn't look back when I walked into the diner. I didn't need to. I could feel Lenora still standing there, caught between the past she destroyed and the future she couldn't rewrite. But I wasn't part of that story anymore. Clara was behind the counter, watching me carefully as I slid into my usual seat. She didn't say anything at first, just poured my coffee like she always did, setting it down in front of me without a word. But after a moment, she leaned against the counter, arms folded, and gave me a look. "So," she said casually, "that your ghost?" I smirked, shaking my head. "Something like that." She nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. Small towns had their share of ghosts. People who left and came back. People who tried to escape their past, but never quite outran it. "She didn't take the hint, huh?" Clara said, glancing toward the window. I followed her gaze. Lenora was still there, standing by her car, staring at the diner like she was trying to convince herself to come inside. I sighed, rubbing my temples. I don't think she came all this way just to walk away that easily. Clara tilted her head. So what's she hoping for? That was the question, wasn't it? Did she really think we could go back? That she could say a few words, shed a few tears, and I'd just what? Forgive her? Pretend none of it happened? I had spent an entire year rebuilding myself from the ground up. I wasn't about to hand her the wreckage and let her tear it all down again. She said she's not done with me. I admitted. But that's not up to her. Clara let out a low whistle. Guess some people don't realize that when you break something, it doesn't always get put back together. I nodded, taking a slow sip of my coffee. The warmth did nothing to chase away the cold not forming in my stomach. I wasn't angry. I thought I would be if I ever saw her again. But the rage had burned out long ago, leaving behind only exhaustion. And maybe, just maybe, a little bit of curiosity. What had her life been like in the past year? Had she been happy? Did she stay with him, the man she thought was worth risking everything for? Or did she realize too late that she had thrown away something real for something fleeting? I wouldn't ask. It wasn't my business anymore. But then, just as I convinced myself I was done thinking about it, the bell above the diner door chimed. I knew before I looked. Lenora had finally stepped inside. Clara shot me a quick glance, silently asking if I wanted her to step in. But I shook my head. This was my ghost to deal with. Lenora stood there for a moment, looking unsure of herself. The confident woman I had once loved, the one who never second-guessed anything, was gone. In her place was someone who looked lost. Slowly, she made her way to my booth and stood there, waiting. I sighed, gesturing to the seat across from me. Might as well sit. She did. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then, finally, she took a deep breath and said, "I don't know how to start." I leaned back in my seat. "Then don't." She frowned, tucking her hair behind her ear. "Merrick, I came all this way." I cut her off. "For what, exactly? What do you want from me?" Her hands curled into fists on the table. "I want to talk. You had a year to talk." My voice was calm, but firm. "You didn't. You let me disappear. And now, suddenly, it matters?" Her jaw tightened. "It always mattered." I let out a short laugh, shaking my head. "If it mattered, I wouldn't have found out the way I did. You wouldn't have laughed at another man's messages in our bed. You wouldn't have." I stopped myself. There was no point in listing all the ways she had already failed me. Lenora swallowed hard. "I was stupid. That's not an apology." She exhaled sharply, looking away. "I know." Silence stretched between us again, but this time, it was heavier. Then she whispered, "I wasn't happy." I froze. She looked up at me, her eyes shining. "Not because of you. Because of me. I was selfish. I thought I needed something different. That I was missing out on something. And by the time I realized what I had done, you were already gone." I clenched my jaw. "And what, exactly, do you want me to do with that information?" Her expression crumbled. "I don't know." And that was the problem. She didn't know. She had come all this way, but she still had nothing to offer except regret. And regret wasn't enough. I sighed, glancing toward the counter where Clara was watching discreetly. Then I looked back at Lenora, who looked like she was waiting for me to decide her fate. But I wasn't the man she walked away from a year ago. I wasn't going to give her that power. So I made the decision for both of us. "This is the last time we'll ever see each other," I said, my voice steady. "You're going to get up, walk out of this diner, and never look for me again. Her breath hitched. Merrick. No, I shook my head. This isn't a movie, Lenora. There's no dramatic reunion, no second chance. You made your choice a long time ago, and I made mine. Tears filled her eyes, but I didn't let it sway me. She searched my face one last time, but whatever she was hoping to find wasn't there anymore. After a long, heavy pause, she stood up, and this time, she was the one walking away. I didn't watch her leave. I just finished my coffee. The moment she stepped out of the diner, the world felt different. Lighter, maybe, as if the weight of a life I no longer lived had finally lifted. I didn't watch her leave, didn't follow her with my eyes to see if she glanced back one last time. It didn't matter. What mattered was that she was gone, and I was still here. Clara approached the table a few minutes later, her presence grounding me in reality. She didn't say anything at first, just picked up my empty coffee cup and refilled it. No questions, no forced conversation. That's what I liked about her. She didn't try to fix people. She just let them be. She's not coming back, is she? She finally asked. I let out a slow breath. No. Clara nodded like she had expected that answer. Good. A smirk tugged at the corner of my lips. That obvious? She leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. I've been a waitress in this town long enough to know when someone's bad news. You weren't yourself the moment she walked through that door. She was right. I had felt it too. That tight, suffocating grip of the past trying to drag me under. Lenora's presence had shaken something in me, not because I wanted her back, but because it reminded me of what I had allowed myself to forget. She had moved on. She had lived her life, while I had spent the last year hiding from mine. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about me. About the fact that I had let a single betrayal define my entire existence for far too long. I exhaled, rubbing a hand over my jaw. You ever get stuck in the past, Clara? She tilted her head, considering the question. I think everyone does, in their own way. Some people try to outrun it, some try to bury it. And some, she smirked, tapping the counter, sit in diners drinking too much coffee, pretending it doesn't bother them. I let out a short chuckle. Guilty, she shrugged. Hey, at least you're not the guy who drinks himself stupid and cries over his eggs every morning. That guy's got it worse. I laughed, shaking my head. That's a pretty low bar, Clara. She grinned. I take my wins where I can get them. For the first time in a long time, I felt okay. Not healed, not suddenly whole again, but okay. And maybe that was enough for now. That night, when I returned to the cabin, I did something I hadn't done in months. I opened the drawer, pulled out my phone, and turned it on. The screen lit up, notifications flooding in. I ignored most of them, but one caught my eye. An email. From an old friend. Still alive, man? Thought you fell off the planet. Call me. I stared at the message for a long time. Then, before I could talk myself out of it, I dialed the number. A familiar voice answered. Holy sh*T. You still exist. I smiled. Yeah, barely. There was a pause, then a chuckle. So, you done being a ghost? I glanced around the cabin, the place I had hidden in, the place I had convinced myself was safe. But safety wasn't living. And for the first time, I realized I wanted more. I took a deep breath. Yeah, I said. I think I am. The next morning, the world felt different. Not in an earth-shattering way. Not like the kind of change you see in movies where everything suddenly clicks into place. No, it was quieter than that. Lighter. Like I had finally set something down after carrying it for too long. I stood outside the cabin, the early morning air crisp against my skin. The trees swayed gently, the sound of rustling leaves filling the space where my thoughts used to race. For the first time in a long time, my mind wasn't consumed by her. By the past. By what had been stolen from me. I wasn't running anymore. After my call with my old friend the night before, I had sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my suitcase, the same one I had packed a year ago when I first left. It was still there, untouched, like I had been waiting for something. But I didn't need to wait anymore. It was time. I went into town for the last time, stopping by the diner. Clara was already there, wiping down the counter. When she saw me, she raised an eyebrow. Should I be worried? She asked, eyeing my duffel bag. I smirked, sliding onto my usual stool. Nah, just finally moving forward. Her lips curved into a knowing smile. About damn time. She poured me a cup of coffee, but this time, it felt different. It wasn't part of a routine I was clinging to, it was just coffee. Just a moment. One of many I had ahead of me. So where to? She asked, leaning against the counter. I thought about it for a moment. Not sure yet. Maybe back home. Maybe somewhere new. I took a sip of coffee, savoring it. But wherever it is, I'm not looking back. Clara studied me for a moment, then nodded in approval. Good. I finished my coffee, left a tip, and stood up. As I turned to leave, she called out, "Hey, Merrick." I looked back. She grinned. "Wherever you end up, don't be a stranger." I chuckled, tipping an imaginary hat. "I'll try." And then I stepped outside, the sun rising on a new day, a new beginning. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't walking away from something. I was walking towards something better.